All right, everyone. For our third part of Lecture 21, we're going to talk about the different stages of sleep. So sleep is not a uniform event. The same things are not happening during all the different parts of the night. And in fact, there are 4 different types or stages of sleep, 4 different phases of sleep. Now, if you look online, some people now are talking about 5 phases of sleep. We're going to use 4. That's what's been used for quite some time, and it's what's in the textbook. So they are subdivided into REM or REM or rapid eye movement sleep when you're having those rapid eye movements underneath your eyelids, and then non-REM or NREM sleep. So the non-REM sleep, there are 3 different stages. The first one is what usually happens first in a night, and that is kind of our light sleep where we're drifting off. And then we move into a deeper sleep. So that's non-REM sleep phase 2. And then we go into the deepest sleep, which is non-REM 3. And there's lots of, that's also called slow wave sleep. We'll look at it in detail in a minute. And then from there, we move into REM sleep, which is when we have most of our dreams. So these different stages, we move through them sequentially in a cycle. So when we fall asleep, we start with non-REM sleep phase 1. And as you can see, we're in it for a small amount of time. And then as time goes, as the night goes, we move into 2, right? This is we're kind of lightly asleep. And then we move into this deepest sleep. And then from there, we move into dreaming. And then after that's done, we start all over again. So we do this periodically through the night, always moving through those phases. And each cycle lasts for about 90 minutes approximately. So in a full night's sleep, which is what we're seeing in this diagram here, you go through about 5 cycles. So let me just show you what we're seeing here. On the y-axis are stages of alertness. So up here is when you're awake, and then this is REM sleep. So they have it kind of in terms of how active your brain is. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then the non-REM stages 1, 2, and 3. So what happens when you first fall asleep is you were awake, and then you pretty quickly descend, through the different phases of sleep down into that deepest sleep. And you spend quite a bit of time there. And then you come up and you have some REM. And then you go back down again and you spend a good amount of time there. You come up, you have a little bit of REM. You might wake up a little bit and then roll over or go to the bathroom or get a drink of water. And then you go down, and you spend a little less time in the deepest sleep, come back up. Now you spend more time in REM. You might have another awakening event, brief, that's fine. And then you go back down, but not quite as deep. And then notice at the end, these last few cycles, you almost spend no time in those deeper stages of sleep, and you spend almost all your time in REM sleep. So what we see is that in the beginning of the night, you're getting big chunks of this really deep sleep, and towards the end of the night, you're getting big chunks of REM sleep. So you always go through the same cycles, but how much time you spend in each one changes during the course of the night as your sleep cycle progresses. So let's talk about them in detail. So non-REM sleep, stage 1 is light sleep. Like you're just dozing, you can be easily awakened, you might even answer questions. And this is the kind of sleep that you'll often do. Your alarm goes off in the morning and you hit snooze. And if you don't go back to dreaming or whatever, but you're kind of awake, you're drowsing, you're just kind of dozing a little bit, that is phase 1 of non-REM sleep. And EEGs at this time will show alpha and theta waves. Remember, we had gamma and then beta. Then alpha was that relaxation. You might also have that when you're just sunning yourself out on the yard. And then theta is below that. And this is brief. We don't spend a lot of time here. It's kind of mostly a transition zone. But a couple of interesting things happen. One is that you might have what are called hypnic jerks, which are these muscle twitches. I think we've all had this. You're falling asleep, and then all of a sudden your leg twitches, and it's this big, huge, it's just a clonic jerk. It's an uncontrolled muscle contraction, and it will sometimes wake you up. So that's just happening as your brain is kind of letting go of its conscious control of things. Sometimes you get you get a signal out there that's just kind of a rogue signal. The other thing that you might have are what are called hypnagogic hallucinations. So sometimes you can actually see or hear things that aren't there. This is just because you're kind of losing your conscious control and your active control of your mind. They are not believed to be real things. They are hallucinations. They can happen during this phase of sleep as well. Next, we move into non-REM sleep, phase 2, which is deeper than 1, which was just dozing. So now you're definitely asleep, but you're not like deeply, deeply asleep. So this is kind of like medium sleep. And on the EEG, we're going to see theta waves, which we sometimes see a little bit in phase 1 sleep. Where's my cursor? Okay, so stage 2 over here. Now, you can also see these little bursts of neural activity. And so if it looks like this, those are usually called sleep spindles. There's another pattern of burst of activity that is called a K complex. There's lots of speculation about what those are for. I spent some time trying to figure out what the latest assessment of it is, and I got differing opinions from different sources. So I think they're still working that out. Some of the theories are that it's your reticular activating system suppressing sensory information. Some are that it's actually part of memory encoding. So there's a lot of ideas out there about what's happening when we see those little bursts of neuronal activity. During this phase of sleep now, your blood pressure, your heart rate, your respiratory rate, which is how fast you're breathing, and your muscle activity all decrease. Now, I should have said in phase 1, you can still be moving around a little bit, like adjusting your position, turning over, those types of things. But when you're in stage 2 sleep, you don't really do that anymore. You're pretty still. Then ultimately we get to our deepest stage of sleep, which is non-REM 3, also called slow wave sleep. So you're really out at this point, and it's difficult to wake you up. So this is when you have to have the alarm like super loud, or you have to have multiple alarms, or somebody has to shake you awake because you're really, really deep. You're just not here. And on the EEG, we're going to see those delta waves, which have the very low frequency but tend to have high amplitude. So that's why they often call it slow wave sleep, because the frequency is low. Yes, yes. All right. And your body's physiologic activity is at its lowest point. So in terms of your metabolism, in terms of your heart rate, your blood pressure, your body temperature, all of those things are at their nadir. They're all at their lowest point. We do know, however, that lots of body repair processes are occurring. So there's still some important things going on. This is also when, interestingly, some of the parasomnias, which are disorders that occur during phases of sleep, such as sleepwalking and sleep talking and bedwetting, can happen during this stage of sleep, which is interesting. There's also some memory consolidation that happens here. Now, one of our textbooks talked about how declarative memories particularly were consolidated during stage 3 slow wave sleep. I wasn't able to find a lot of confirmation of that it's that type of memory specifically, but just know that this stage is important in memory consolidation. We'll just leave it at that. And then the other thing is that the glymphatic system is very active, and this is new. You haven't heard of this before. So let's talk about what it is. The glymphatic system is closely related on interfaces with our CSF. So let's just remember that CSF is made in the choroid plexus and gets secreted. Remember those ependymal cells with the cilia? So it gets secreted into the ventricles, especially the lateral ventricle, the third ventricle, and then the cilia circulate that fluid through. It goes through the cerebral aqueduct into the fourth ventricle, which is just anterior to the cerebellum. Then some of it goes out into the subarachnoid space. Some of it goes down through the central canal of the spinal cord. Remember that whole circulation of CSF on the inside and around the outside of the whole central nervous system. And then that ultimately drained through the arachnoid granulations into those dural venous sinuses, like that superior sagittal sinus. Remember we had the transverse sinuses, the sigmoid sinus. So that CSF eventually dumps into the veins. So then it's in the circulatory system and it goes back to the heart and the lungs and all that kind of stuff. So it's why you're continually making new CSF, and then it drains into your bloodstream so that then any waste products can be handled by your liver, your kidneys, all that stuff. So it turns out that there's also fluid that is coming out of the arteries, especially during every pulsation that occurs with every heartbeat. Now you might be saying, but Dr. Hall, what about the blood-brain barrier? Yeah, I know, right? It's supposed to be really tight so that not a lot of things can get through, but water can get through. And it turns out there's this special gene that is involved with a special water channel in the astrocytes. So remember, the astrocytes send out their end feet to make part of the blood-brain barrier. But it turned out that they have a special water channel so that some fluid leaks out from the arteries into the brain tissue itself. And then that fluid percolates through the brain tissue, during which time, like between all the cells, during which time it's called interstitial fluid. Some people call it CSF, some people don't. It gets confusing when you read the literature. But ultimately then, so what they're showing you down here is, so they're showing you that fluid is coming out of the arteries, right? Then it percolates down through the brain, and then it drains over into the subarachnoid space, and then there through the arachnoid granulations into the venous system, into the dural venous sinuses. So what's cool about this is it is cleaning out, is flushing out. We are constantly washing out our brain tissue with this fluid, which is awesome. And it turns out that it clears out lots of wastes that accumulate, including beta amyloid, which we learned last unit, that beta amyloid accumulation is one of the things that is driving the process, the pathological process that we see in Alzheimer's disease. Remember, and then ultimately it reaches a tipping point, and then you get the tau tangles, and then you get neuron cell death, and then you get all the problems. So what's neat is that when we're in this deepest stage of sleep, the slow wave sleep, this non-REM phase 3 sleep, our neurons actually, it's so cool they were able to measure this. The neurons actually kind of shrink up a little bit so that there's more space around them to make it easier for this fluid to flow through and therefore do a deep clean. So we increase the rate of this fluid percolating through our brain tissue by about 2 times. It goes about 2 times faster through the brain during this deep sleep. So this is when we do a deep clean of our brains to get all the toxic things that have accumulated during the day flushed out so that then we're going to be fresh and ready for another day. I think that's so cool. We only discovered this like 10, 15 years ago. It's awesome. Okay, so we fell asleep. We were in non-REM 1, then non-REM 2, then non-REM 3, our slow wave sleep, where we did memory consolidation and cleaned out our brain with our glymphatic system. And then we come into REM sleep. So now we're having those rapid eye movements. And the brain waves, interestingly, look almost identical to ones when you're awake. So they look very similar to beta and gamma waves. And this is also when dreaming occurs. Now, you sometimes can dream during other phases of sleep, but for the most part, vivid dreaming occurs during REM. What are dreams? I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows. A lot of people have some really interesting ideas. One of the ideas is that because we see so much neuronal activity, so much brain activity during REM sleep, some people think that it's just the brain's attempts to form a story to understand what's happening. It just like concocts these stories that we see and live out in our head. I don't know. During this phase of sleep, you are pretty much paralyzed. So remember, in the first part of this lecture, we talked about how the pons inhibits any motor signals so that you don't move your muscles very much when you're asleep. During this phase of sleep, most of us are paralyzed. That's probably a safety mechanism so we don't act out our dreams. It's a disorder if you act out your dreams. And we also know that a lot of memory consolidation occurs here. Again, the one textbook said it's mostly procedural or skill memory consolidation that happens here. but some other sources suggest that other types of memory also are being consolidated. We do know, for example, that athletes that want to perform at their best, especially when they're training and they're learning and fine-tuning and really honing skills, it's super important to make sure they get a full night's worth of REM sleep so that they can get the optimal benefit from all that work they did during the day by consolidating all those procedure and skill memories that night so they don't lose them. This is also why you're usually better at doing a physical task that you've learned the day before after you've slept on it. So in summary, our stages of sleep, we have multiple cycles moving through the same stages or the same phases over and over again, although we spend more or less time in different areas of the stages, depending on what part of the night we're in. So non-REM 1 is that light sleep, you're dozing off. It's pretty brief. Then we move into non-REM 2, which is deeper. We see theta waves with those sleep spindles and K complexes that could be a variety of things. They're still working on it. And then into non-REM 3, which is our deepest sleep, our slow wave sleep, where we see those delta waves on EEG. Lots of bodily repair processes are happening. Our brain is secreting growth hormone. Memory consolidation is happening. I'm sorry, I forgot to put that on this slide. And the glymphatic system is cleaning out the brain and getting rid of beta amyloid and other waste products. So that fluid is percolating through. And then we move into REM, which is when we dream, we have rapid eye movement, we are paralyzed, and we're doing additional memory consolidation there. So it's important to get the full 8 hours of sleep, or approximately that many, because in the first part of the night, you're getting all your deep stage 3 slow wave sleep. So you're cleaning out the brain and consolidating some memories then. But then the REM sleep that you have mostly predominantly in the second half of the night is really important also for memory consolidation. So you don't want to deprive yourself of those opportunities to really optimize your mental functioning. And if you look, you can get in those last 2 hours of sleep, some people get like 30 to 50% of their total night's REM happens in those last 2 hours. So if you're only getting 6 hours of sleep a night, you might be depriving yourself of half of the REM that you need to fully consolidate your memories. So kind of important when you're trying to remember things for school. Please try to get enough sleep. All right, then lecture 22, we'll talk about circadian rhythms, and maybe we'll also talk about some of the importance of sleep. All right, thanks everyone.